Good morning and a very warm welcome to European Development Days 2015, both to our audience here in this room and also to those of us following us from the neighbouring auditoria A2 and A3 of this venue. My name is Katrina Sickle, and I'm delighted and privileged to be your mistress of ceremonies for this opening ceremony. I'm quite bossy, so the role suits me very well, but I'm British, so I'm also immensely polite. First, could you put your phones on silent? That's the most important thing. It can be very disconcerting for speakers if we hear a ping in somebody's inbox. So can you just rootle in your pockets and your bags and ensure that your phones are on silent? Secondly, do you have a set of headphones? There is interpretation available in English on channel 4 and French on channel 5, so can you just raise your hand now if you don't have a set of headphones and you need a set of headphones and somebody will come. There's quite a few people and somebody will come running to you. I will speak very slowly to enable you to catch up with where I am before you have your headphones. We have some people here. Anybody else? And we have a couple of people here. Oh, we have quite a few. So it may just take a moment. You may miss a little bit of my preamble. Okay, so we have people here, here, and here. You may also have noticed that a sign language auditorium. Also, can you kindly be aware that a social media team dedicated to live coverage of the debates throughout the two-day forum is present, so feel free to tweet when you are able, enthusiastically, and don't forget to use hashtag EDD15. Let me just take a short moment to set the scene for you. This is the 9th edition of European Development Days, and it's the first edition under the new European Commission. I'm just going to give these fine speakers a chance to settle. Just a moment. And let the photographers have a moment to do their thing. Thank you. And everybody else who needs to settle, now's your moment. If you don't have good seats, now you've just got a sneaking couple of seconds to find better seats. Okay, so it's the flagship event of the European Year for Development that was launched in Latvia on the 8th of January. And the focus of EDD15 echoes the motto of the European Year: our world, our dignity, our future. Now, the sense of sharing is reflected in one of the aims of this year's forum, which is to tell stories from around the world that show that regardless of our individual backgrounds, our culture, our situations, our aspirations are the same. Now, these stories also aim at engaging European citizens across the continent in embracing the positive change that is unfolding across the world and to which the EU is the largest contributor. This year, participants will explore issues according to 4 themes and 12 topics: how to create sustainable growth, how to promote universal and fundamental rights, how to achieve greater cooperation among all actors. These are the kinds of challenges that will be tackled through discussion and debate and an exchange of ideas and best practices. But it's not all chat. Participants can see the concrete outcomes of international cooperation through 50 project examples showcased in the Practice Village. Please do take the time to visit. Well, I think you've heard enough from me for the moment. If you're all happily settled, and everybody is settled on the front row, I'm going to welcome the first of our speakers. Now, our first speaker isn't going to get too comfortable as he's going to be taking the stairs and the microphone in just a moment. Jean-Claude Juncker succeeded José Manuel Barroso as President of the European Commission on the 1st of November 2014. Prior to that, he served as Prime Minister of Luxembourg from 1995 to 2013 and was also President of the Eurogroup, the Ministers of Finance from the Eurozone that helped to lead Europe out of the economic crisis. Now, as the new President of the Commission, one of his clear aims is to be more effective in bringing together the tools of Europe's external action, including its development aid. There's a lot more I could say. I know he's heard it all before many, many times. So, without further delay, could you please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I have to apologize for the fact that I forgot my speech on my desk, which is not leading me into major troubles, but nevertheless, it's unfortunate. I was sent the second page of my notes, but the first page is missing, and so starting on the second page, I will try to reinvent the first page of this speech. Madame et Monsieur le Premier ministre, Mesdames et Messieurs les
Prime Minister, members of Parliament, Your Excellencies, Commissioners, I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. This is the 9th edition of the European Development Days. It's the first time that I have had the honor of being here. I am happy to be here, but I must say that I will be leaving the room after my speech because I still have a few issues to resolve with what has now been called the Greek case, which involves various meetings that I have today, including with the Greek Prime Minister. But I'm very pleased to see you all here today for this opportunity to exchange ideas. It's a kind of Davos of development. There's the first page. My first page is on its way in.
As I was taking notes early this morning, I can't read it, but nevertheless I will try to find me back. As I was saying, I'm happy to be here to assist to this meeting of ideas, to this Davos of development. La réunion d'aujourd'hui tombe à point.
Our meeting is very timely. There's the European Parliament. They're always late.
Monsieur le Président, bonjour.
Good morning, Mr. President. Well, the President has arrived, so we can now continue properly. I was saying that the meeting is very timely because we're about midway in the European Year of Development. The European Year of Development allows us to examine the efforts we have made over the past few years and to take stock of our results. But the European Year of Development is also a new beginning. It's a chance for us to renew our efforts. There'll be 3 major meetings over the course of the year, which will each have a name of a city: Addis Ababa, Paris, and New York. These are different processes, but which are linked closely together. The success of one doesn't necessarily mean the success of the other, but if one fails, then another can fail. So we have to keep following all 3 at the same time. I'm convinced that we have to adopt the approach which is as inclusive as possible and which aims at the future. Our approach must be inclusive. We have to involve political leaders, civil society, the private sector, and to all our citizens. We have to pursue the same path, whether we're from the north or the south of the planet. Europe, or the European Union, because that's not the same thing, but the European Union part of Europe is not a provisional invention, but it's not a purpose in and of itself. We have our own ambitions and purposes, but the European Union also has to look to the rest of the world, and our ambitions have to go beyond the European borders. We have an obligation to deal with our duties elsewhere. Our commitment in the world and for the world is not, as some people might think, just a charitable exercise, a well-intentioned charitable exercise. No, we want to establish a partnership among the various stakeholders. Europe often tends to have an unhealthy navel gazing and looking at itself and not looking elsewhere. No, we have to shoulder our responsibilities and our duties. We have to establish a true partnership which will work to both of our benefits. We're not trying to organize relations between those who give and those who receive. That's not how I see a partnership. A partnership is based on the idea that all parties have equal dignity. Our conviction in Europe is that we have to serve, we have to refuse a bipolar world in which you have some parts that move forward and others which stagnate. Now, it's true that we have made significant progress over the past few years and tangible results. In 1990, 36% of the world's population was below the poverty threshold. Today, the figure is terrible still, but it has been improved, and it's 12%. But despite this tangible result, of which we should be proud, but which should enforce our sense of responsibility towards the 12% who are still below the poverty threshold, it means that there are still 1 billion men, women, and children who live with less than €1 per day. One person out of 8 goes to bed with an empty stomach. Now, that's not acceptable. And we have to do everything we can to correct this situation. Poverty is not inevitable. 1/4 of the world's population doesn't have access to vital medicines, and 1/3 of the urban population lives in tenements. Now, these are figures, but what we're talking about are men and women and children. And we're also talking about us, Europeans, who have the privilege of living in the richest part of the world. We can't lose hope that we can achieve the tools to deal with the situation. We have to change this situation. This is a source of instability, and it threatens countries who are affected by poverty, and that threatens us, those of us who live under the sun of history. The problems of those who are underdeveloped are our problems. There is no wall between the two. We're all sitting in the same boat. It is a scandal that a number of countries have reduced their aid to development. That is not the case of the country that I know the best. I was told that as a commissioner I shouldn't talk about Luxembourg. I should talk about the country I know the best. Anyway, Luxembourg's aid to development is one of the highest in the world. When I was a young minister for the budget, we had 0.17%, and today is more than 1%. And I'm very grateful to my successor, Prime Minister Bettel, to have pursued this. Of course, he didn't have any other choice because he his convictions is that he believes in the advantages of international solidarity. It is not acceptable that many countries, including European countries, have reduced their aid The economic crisis has often led to despair and even to death in other parts of the country. So this simplistic idea that we can reduce development aid is a wrong idea. European countries have to correct their aid and increase their aid, which means that the objective which we have in the Commission, which I have the honor of being the president of, we have to achieve the objectives we've set for ourselves beyond 2015. According to the polls, well, I don't really usually believe in polls, but at any rate, 83% of Europeans are in favor of the usefulness, to see that aid is useful. 67% of Europeans feel that development aid should be increased, so the politicians have to take note of that. So the European Union comes out in favor of the percentage. Now, that doesn't really mean all that much, because the last time we discussed this in 2005, when Luxembourg chaired, we said then that we have to increase our efforts in order to achieve this objective. It's not a noble objective, but it is an objective which is necessary in order to bring an end to this bipolar world. European Union represents 20% of the world's GDP, but the European Union represents 50% of the world's cooperation aid. We could be proud of that, but I'm not, because I think that the richest part of the world can do more, and we should do more. The others should do the same, and even the emerging economies should contribute to this worldwide effort. All of our efforts, all of our contributions will, of course, mean nothing if we don't take seriously our concerns about human rights. All the efforts will be in vain if the international society doesn't realize that human rights have to be respected wherever we are. And that is why the Commission recently proposed a European agenda for migration. And I would just note in passing that the member states' enthusiasm is not overwhelming, but the Commission will not change its ideas about legal and illegal migration. It's a question of respecting human rights. A person who leaves his country for economic reasons, a person who leaves his country for political reasons, has to have his or her dignity respected. That's our idea of man. And that is what we should do, and the Commission will not change its position despite the opposition of some member states. Development must mean shared solidarity. Europe will increase its credibility if it shares with those who are the weakest. I hope that this meeting will be a very successful one, and I have to apologize to the President of the Parliament for having to leave. But I, of course, out of interinstitutional interest and personal interest, I will, of course, listen to the speech of the President of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Juncker, for officially opening the forum and also for providing a broader context and reminding us all why we are here. So we're spoiled this morning, as I'm shortly going to hand over control of the stage to another important representative of the EU institutions, Martin Schulz. Martin Schulz is the first president in the history of the European Parliament to serve a second term, re-elected as he was in July 2014, but he had already been walking those Parliament corridors for some years, having been elected as an MEP in 1994, serving on the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and then on the Committee on Civil Liberties and Home Affairs. From 2004, as group leader of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, Mr. Schulz continued to campaign for social justice and democracy, equality and the fight against climate change, among other pressing issues. In fact, who knows, perhaps he has not slept very much from then until now. But I can assure you that he is indeed very wide awake this morning. I'm delighted now to hand over the stage. Could you put your hands together, please, for Martin Schulz, President of the European Parliament. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here with you today and to open the 2015 European Development Days together with you, President of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker. Merci beaucoup pour votre chaleureux bienvenue.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome when I arrived. I was late, you're right. But sufficiently on time to check what the President of the Commission was saying.
Dear Laim Dota, Xavier, Prime Minister Bettel, and Ms. Gates. This conference, ladies and gentlemen, could not have been organized at a better time. 2015 is not only the European year of development. This year will be decisive for defining the goals of the post-2015 development agenda. And these European Development Days, together with US participants and stakeholders, can help make 2015 the year where we successfully address the most pressing challenges. The fight against poverty and hunger surely continue to be at the very top of our agenda. Today, 1 billion people still live in extreme poverty. That is 1 billion people living on less than, Jean-Claude mentioned the dramatic dimension, less than $1.25 a day. But there is also good news, encouraging news. In the past 20 years, we have accomplished astonishing things. 3 examples. We increased the number of people who have access to clean drinking water by 2.3 billion. Child mortality is down by almost 50%. That is more than 7,000 children per day who do not die, whose lives are saved thanks to malaria medication, HIV prevention, among other factors. And last but not least, we succeeded in more than halving the percentage of people living in extreme poverty in developing regions. Halving extreme poverty is, in my eyes, an enormous success, and the European Union, as you mentioned, dear colleague Juncker, as one of the biggest donor and contributor, this is a result also of our engagement. It was Bono who pointed out to me that if we continue with poverty eradication at this pace, we will manage to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. A dream of humankind is within our reach, making extreme poverty history. And if we, and I quote Bono once more, don't mess it up. So what could go wrong? That's one of the most important questions we should raise. For one, we could cut much-needed development budgets. While the European Union, as the world's largest provider of development assistance, has contributed significantly to the fight against poverty, I am worried that this year some of our member states, and here I share entirely the view of the President of the Commission, some of our member states have missed the target of contributing 0.7% of their GDP to development assistance. And this is no secret, the European Parliament and I personally, we are still angry that during the last multi-annual financial framework negotiations, international aid was cut in the EU budget. And these cuts are an enormous damage to the credibility of the European Union. And at the end, they cost lives. My parliament will keep on pushing the governments until they fulfill their commitments of the 0.7% target and again increase the development aid in the EU budget. One of the chances for it is the midterm review, which is, ladies and gentlemen, a big success in my eyes for the European Parliament, not a non-binding agreement between the institutions, the member states, the European Parliament and the Commission. It is written in the regulation that in the midterm we have to revise the MFF. And if we really want to be credible in the development year 2015, I would be happy if we all agree, the member states and the institutions of the European Union, to get back to a credible financing of development aid also in the European multi-annual budgets. Secondly, we could lose the fight against climate change. This, of course, would be a tragedy for all of humanity, but poor people and poor countries would be affected worst. It is they which are most vulnerable those who are the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, such as rising sea levels, extreme weather, decreasing yields, and growing water scarcity. Therefore, it is, in my eyes, imperative that at this year's Paris Climate Summit, we bring about a universal and binding agreement in line with the 2-degree target. I am proud that the European Union is leading in the fight against climate change. We have committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. But our aim must be the worldwide promotion of low-carbon development models. The European Parliament therefore has called for an EU roadmap for scaling up predictable, new and additional climate finance towards the Copenhagen Climate Summit commitment. Thirdly, corruption continues to be a real obstacle in winning the fight against poverty, because corruption hits poor people hardest. It means schools and hospitals do not get built because taxpayers' money or development aid is stolen. It means services people depend on, like the provision of drinking water, healthcare or sanitation, is of low quality or completely lacking. It's high time we recognize, ladies and gentlemen, also in such conferences and debates, that the battle against poverty and corruption is linked. Fair taxation is also key. The European Parliament strongly supports fair and efficient tax systems and international tax cooperation to allow countries to mobilize domestic resources. It is not acceptable that developing countries lose more money from illicit financial flows than what they receive in development aid. My fourth point is one that is often overlooked in the fight against poverty, that's violence. Today, more people are fleeing from violent conflicts than at any other time since the end of the Second World War. More than 50 million people are on the run due to hunger, human rights abuses, oppression, terrorism, or war. When millions of people are forced to leave their homes, it profoundly undermines the development potential of their country. Their displacement also generates additional needs that have to be met by the international community and especially host countries, which are, for the most part, developing countries themselves. We listened in the European Parliament to the King of Jordan when he described what it means in a country with 5 million inhabitants, around 2 million refugees have to be received. And if I am listening to some of the debates in the member states of the European Union comparing the figures of a country like Jordan with the figures in Europe, I feel shame. 86% of all refugees are hosted by developing countries. Surely this is a disproportionate duty. And again, it is the poor who suffer most from violence. Violence keeps parents from fetching water and earning a livelihood, and children from going to school. Indeed, 1 in 2 of the world's out-of-school children live in regions affected by violence. And this further aggravates poverty. Estimates suggest that poverty could drop by 12% if all children in low-income countries could read. Education contributes to sustainable growth and more stable and accountable governments. And girls' education in particular yields some of the highest returns of all development investments. Ladies and gentlemen, by investing in education and putting an end to violence, we help people escape poverty. The extremism and violence of the so-called Islamic State or Boko Haram is shocking to all of us. Yet, it cannot be stopped by military means only. We need to find political solutions for the areas concerned and restore the role of trustworthy governments. I hope that in 2015 we will not lessen our ambitions, but step them up and make 2015 a key year in setting a new development agenda which will have at its heart the goal of eradication extreme poverty within 1 generation. Ladies and gentlemen, your conference today, and I think the presence of the President of the European Commission, the European Parliament, the acting President of the Council of the European Union, and the incoming presidency shows how important the European institutions, how much importance the European institutions give to the development year 2015. I want, as President of the European Parliament, to present my gratitude to you, President Juncker. The Commission is, since last year, since the beginning of your mandate, strongly involved and investing in development policy. Thanks to the Latvian presidency, who put it on the agenda during your semester, and thanks to you, Prime Minister Bettel, we just yesterday and the day before yesterday met with your government, and I'm absolutely convinced that in the Luxembourg presidency we will succeed because your government, as your predecessor mentioned, is committed to achieve the goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish your conference fruitful debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin Schulz. And so, from the Commission to the Parliament to the Council, and the woman in the hot seat of the current presidency, Prime Minister of Latvia, Laimdota Straujuma. Just one moment. I just want to see if there's anybody who hasn't got headphones still. They could raise their hands. You might get some help because I know that Ms. Straujuma is going to speak in Latvian, and I'd like you all to be able to hear that. So, Ms. Straujuma has held the position of... Oh, my goodness me. Okay, I've opened a door. I shall continue to introduce her, and we shall continue to crack on. So, Ms. Straujuma has held the position of Prime Minister since January 2014 and is the first woman to do so. She launched her political career in 2000 and has occupied a number of different posts, including prior to her current role as Minister of Agriculture. Now, EDD15 takes place in the final month of the Latvian presidency, of which some of the main priorities have been gender equality and women's empowerment. Fitting then that just 2 months ago, with less than a year left until the deadline for the Millennium Development Goals, a high-level event on women's empowerment and sustainable development was organized in Riga by the Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the European Commission. And most fitting too then that Laimdota Straujuma should join us here today. Please put your hands together and give a very, very warm welcome to Laimdota Straujuma. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, it's my possibility to speak Latvian here. Therefore, I apologize that you will need to have translation. So, dear augsti godātais mans draugs Luksemburgas ministru prezidents Batelkungs,
Mr. Battle, dear friend, excellencies, commissioners, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor, it is an honor for me to take part in this most important European Development Forum together with all of you. We are in the middle of the European Year for Development, and it seems not so long ago when, together with Mr. Juncker, we opened the European Year for Development in Riga, the capital of Latvia. I am pleased that this year all Europe has mobilized forces for development cooperation and that Latvian presidency is taking place in this historic moment for global development. Therefore, today I'd like to speak about what Latvia has already achieved as a presiding country in the Council of the EU and what still needs to be done. I'd like to highlight two very important development agenda items. The first, the new UN Sustainable Development Goals after 2015, and number two, the necessity to eliminate gender discrimination. Now first, the new post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. It is in this decisive period of the Latvian presidency when the negotiations on how we really want to see the future of the world in the next 15 years are unfolding. The post-2015 negotiations are a truly unique global process. Never before so many partners have been involved in the drafting of a development document. Never before so many views have been expressed and heard. There is much to be done. We want to eradicate poverty, ensure the sustainability of environment, create inclusive global economy, attain gender equality, and create education opportunities for everyone, just to mention a few of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. However, setting ambitious goals is just the first step, but to change the course of history, concrete deeds and mutual cooperation are indispensable. Immediate action is required to meet the new global challenges, especially migration. Cooperation is necessary between all parties, countries of origin and transit, as well as host countries. It is not acceptable that people are forced to leave their homeland and put their lives at stake in the hope for decent living conditions and the respect for their fundamental rights. Although the EU takes active measures to save lives in the Mediterranean, the set of these activities is a mere response to the consequences of broader structural problems. It is development cooperation which is the policy that can resolve the economic, social, political and environmental causes of the forced and illegal migration. It is development cooperation policy that has instruments to improve the living standards and stabilize the political situation, ensure the rule of law, create jobs and dignified living conditions for each and every inhabitant of the country. Therefore, we have to change fundamentally the way we cooperate. By we, I mean all parties involved. I mean states, civic society, local authorities, employees, and employers in all continents, in all cities and villages. Everyone has to undertake their share of responsibility, and our society must be transparent and inclusive. Only by working together in a global partnership, we will achieve our common goals by 2030. The new global partnership should promote human rights, equality, good governance, the rule of law, inclusiveness, sustainability of environment, and it must be taken in account on all political levels, internationally, regionally, and in particular nationally. Drawing from the Latvian experience, I'd like to underscore that setting the goals is of particular importance on the level of national governments. In the year 2000, when the Millennium Goals were adopted, Latvia was neither the EU nor NATO member state. Today, we are the presiding country in the Council of the EU, and we are proud, having turned from aid recipients into aid providers over a short period of time. We have also drawn lessons from overcoming the recent deep economic crisis, when in 2008 Latvia's GDP dropped by 25%. It was national coordination, inclusive social policy, and structural reforms that helped us overcome the crisis. So we've gone through the reforms before the EU and NATO accession, and we've drawn our lessons recently, and we have experience that we are ready to share and pass on. The international system is an irreplaceable support, but every country itself is fully responsible for the well-being of its people and sustainable economic growth. Sharing experience and lessons drawn on the basis of equal partnership is the central element in the development cooperation implemented by Latvia. And now I'd like to move on to the second item of my brief address. And I'd like to emphasize that our main goal is unconditional respect for human rights of all people in the world. The rights of women and girls are human rights, but they are violated in many parts of the world. Data show that 35% of women in the world have suffered from physical and sexual violence. If nothing changes in our aspirations, it will take 80 years to reach gender equality in the world. We simply cannot wait that long. It is for this reason that Latvia, as one of the world's leader in gender equality, has set the rights of women and girls, as well as gender equality, as one of the priorities of our presidency. Any girl in the world, if she wishes so, should have an opportunity to become the Prime Minister. Latvia has experience to share. And by supporting gender equality in different areas, we have managed to arrive at a situation when 53% of scientists in Latvia are women, 68% of people with higher education are women, and women take leading positions in more than 40% of Latvian enterprises, which is the highest ratio among the EU member states. Gender equality has been our priority on the highest political level in Brussels and in New York, where we have organized thematic conferences, taking part in drafting of strategically important documents, as well as in the negotiations with the private sector and civil society. I invite you to participate in the discussion organized by the Latvian presidency tomorrow on concrete solutions to strengthen economic opportunities for women in Central Asia. Women and girls are insufficiently used potential to enhance prosperity. Today, in 140 countries in the world, there are laws discriminating women. Therefore, it has to be made possible in legal and realistic terms for them to use their potential. We will all gain from it. For example, according to the UN forecasts, if there were the same amount of jobs ensured for men and women, the GDP of developing countries would increase by 15%. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning I had an opportunity to meet young people from all over the world, and I was truly pleased to see their bright, shining eyes and their wish to change the world. But it will depend on us, on adults, politicians here in this hall and beyond, whether we will be able to justify their expectations. And I have to apologize. Unfortunately, I have to leave right away. I have to go to the airport to return to Latvia because today we have the presidential election in Latvia, and I would like to be there to congratulate the new president of Latvia this evening. Let me conclude by thanking all of you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. I wish you all creative discussions and good cooperation during the European Development Days. Thank you very much, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laimdota Straujuma. So we have two fine speakers who are left to address you this morning. The first of these is Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister of Luxembourg, which is the member state that will shortly take over the presidency of the EU Council. Now, Mr. Bettel took up his current post as Prime Minister in December 2013, succeeding Jean-Claude Juncker. Previous to that, in 2011, he had become mayor of Luxembourg at an impressively tender age, and in 2013 was elected leader of the Democratic Party, leading the party in his country's election the same year. In the current government's three-party coalition, he holds the functions of Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister of Worship, someone else who probably has no time to sleep. Please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Xavier Bettel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the guests who are still here. Madame Gates, I will stay for your speech too. Monsieur le Commissaire, cher Laimdota,
Commissioner Laimdota, President of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be in Brussels today for the European Development Days, which are covering an exceptional breadth of topics this year because we have the European Year of Development and the international agenda for the conference on funding for development in Addis Ababa, the renegotiations of the development framework for the Sustainable Development Goals, and the COP21 meeting in Paris.
My friend Laimdota. Our two countries have such different histories, be it in the European Union or in our development cooperation. Together, we represent the diversity of the EU and both hold the presidency of the Council this year. Today, through hard work and serious investment, we can stand free and united with other European Union nations with equal opportunities for all. Wealth is not a permanent status. One only has to look at the southern boundaries of the EU to see how closely migration and development are linked. In the 19th century, Luxembourg was a land of immigration because people could not live off the land. Syria, formerly a relatively prosperous country, is now the recipient of humanitarian aid. It is estimated that over 7.5 million people are displaced, with many living in refugee camps or making perilous journey across the Mediterranean. Women, children, elderly or disabled people, minorities, all have the right to live in dignity and to ensure that their human rights are respected. This is the very essence of development cooperation. This is the goal we must strive to. These European Development Days have brought us together from the four corners of the earth. We are here to make things happen. We have the opportunity to shape the future and to meet the needs of millions of people all over the world. The decisions made at international level this year will impact on this and future generations. The motto of the 2015 European Year for Development is our world, our dignity, our future. For me, dignity is particularly important. Every single one of us has the right and should be given the means to live their lives in dignity. All of us here today have a shared responsibility to ensure that the results of the international discussions in Addis Ababa, New York, and Paris ensure that no one is left behind. If a young person cannot go to school, if a young woman cannot choose how to live her life, when, how, and with whom she has children, we still have work to do. If students cannot do their homeworks because there is no light in their homes, their dignity is not assured. 2015 has to be a decisive year to bring about the changes necessary to ensure a decent life for all. The development and the climate change agenda are closely intertwined. Recent environmental catastrophes and health epidemics sadly demonstrate this. Continued investment in development cooperation is essential. Initiatives such as the European Year of Development ensure that member states uphold investment in difficult economic times. We are now halfway through the year, and while it's too early to draw conclusions, we must step up our engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, everyone can make a difference. We need to convince people that they too can contribute to development. It is a part of our global responsibility. Trade should be based on fair principles and be socially just. Partnerships should actually be partnerships. We need to include young people in development cooperation. We must fight apathy and demonstrate that each and every one of them can contribute to a better world. For example, Luxembourg has set up an ambitious program for the European Year for Development, and one of the initiatives is to launch a video competition, The Shining Stars of Europe, with the Latvian presidency and the European Commission representation in Luxembourg. Young people can make a short film about innovative idea and be engaged. We have a solid experience and expertise in development cooperation and in achieving consensus. Luxembourg, holding the presidency from the 1st of July, will have a crucial role to play in the last steps of the international negotiations. We will actively work on bold and innovative solutions. Especially this year, we have to pass on the message that development is a shared responsibility. It is not a luxury that we can choose to have in times of prosperity, but must be continued commitment in our global interest. Croyez-moi.
So, believe me, Lamdata as well, that in times of crisis, the first reflex which some populists will have will be to say, cut the cooperation budget. Why do you want to help other people when we have problems in our own country? That will be the reflex reaction from these people. I would ask all those people who say this to see what they're actually saying. Cooperation aid means giving dignity to people who, from a very young age, don't have the chance, from when they're born, don't have the chance to choose. And we have choices which we have to make on a daily basis, but they're luxury choices. So cooperation aid must not be the first thing to be cut. We need to shut these populists up when they try to say that there are more problems at home than there are elsewhere. Let them go and see what problems other people have. People who don't have anything to eat. People who, rather than having to choose whether they want to be hot or cold, have to decide whether they will be able to get enough to eat that week, and if so, where from. So development cooperation and cooperation aid is not a luxury, and what we've seen recently is something which I've been shocked by. Imagining that people are leaving their countries, running the risk of drowning in the Mediterranean, that it's a pleasure for them. That's completely wrong. They're fleeing death and danger, war in their countries. And now, for some countries in Europe, when we start speaking about quotas, for them to start saying right from the outset, I don't want any quotas, we're not interested in that. I would ask the political leaders of those countries to really focus on what dignity means. You can't speak about a future, you can't speak about dignity if human perspectives and human futures are simply left up to calculations which will be carried out after a council meeting. So I'd ask everyone to shoulder their responsibility to show solidarity. It's not a luxury, this, and things may change in the future. We may need help in the future. We need to help those countries now. So when we speak about dignity, we want to make sure people can live in dignity. And I'd ask the people, the leaders in our countries, to find the dignity which they need to show for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bettel, for speaking with such immense passion. I think you've shaken up the room in a good way. Thank you. And so, to our last speaker of the morning, and another woman, which always brings a smile to my face. Undoubtedly known to this gathering, Melinda Gates is co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, launched in 2000, and since 2006, the largest private foundation in the world. Now organized into 3 divisions that focus on global health, global development, and community and education causes in the United States, the foundation is committed to solving health problems around the world, developing treatments and vaccines for malaria, controlling insects that transmit diseases, and developing superfoods in the fight against malnutrition. Now, in 2012, the foundation pledged $650 million towards improving access to contraception for women in developing countries. Reaching out to other organizations and countries is one of the foundation's hallmarks and is inspired by an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. I hope I haven't stolen any first words there. And on that note, please put your hands together and give a very, very warm welcome to Melinda Gates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for that very moving speech. You know, under any circumstances, I'd be thrilled to speak in front of the European Development Days, but this year I'm especially enthusiastic because it happens to be the most important year in international development in a whole generation. It's the European Year of Development. The G7 meeting is coming up in just a few days. We have a chance, again, to make sure that global health and development stays on the agenda. This year's G7 meeting is a pivotal year for development, as pivotal as the year of 2002, when we decided as a world to fund the Global Fund for AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But most important in September is what's going to happen in September of 2015 at the United Nations. We will agree on the next set of Sustainable Development Goals, and many of you in this room are working on those SDGs. But even, I think, for the insiders who've been working on these goals so closely the last 2 years, sometimes we can forget what an incredible landmark they are. Remember, when the Millennium Development Goals were set, they were an experiment for the world. The hope was that they would galvanize the development community, but nobody knew for sure, and now we do know. The MDGs don't get all the credit for the progress the world has made in the past generation. The credit goes to many of you in this room and many of our colleagues who work around the world on the very front lines. But the goals are part of a successful formula. In the past 25 years, extreme poverty has been cut in half. Childhood mortality has been cut in half. Maternal mortality is almost down by half. Those are MDGs 1, 4, and most of 5. So as the world now converges on a set of sustainable development goals, we know a lot more today than we did 15 years ago when the Millennium Development Goals were set. We know it's important to get the goals and the targets right and to get buy-in from all the UN member states. We also know, really importantly, a lot more about what works. We know where we need to focus the resources, and we know that success is possible. When you add all these factors together, it's a good reason for us to be very ambitious as a world. We have never had a roadmap to end extreme poverty before. We never even dreamed that it was possible before. But by the end of this year, we will do more than just dream. We will start executing on a strategy to make poverty history. And to tell you a little bit about what those world goals look like when you're out on the ground in rural Ethiopia, which I've now done 7 times, it means that a little health post that is half the size of this stage, Ethiopia has built out 15,000 of them. When you go into that health post, the healthcare workers, the 2 women that staff it, they have pieces of paper up on the wall and they've used markers to tell you about childhood deaths, tell you about neonate deaths, tell you how many children are vaccinated, tell you how many women come in for their antenatal visits, tell you how many women died in childbirth. Those goals set at the global level translate all the way down on the ground and are what are making the health systems work. It is why we have seen the biggest drop in childhood mortality in the history of the earth in the last 5 years in Rwanda. And it's why we're seeing Rwanda and Sri Lanka and Ethiopia and Senegal all focusing on their primary healthcare system so that we can reach millions and millions of women and children with what they need and to end poverty. So I'm marking another milestone year this year. The Gates Foundation has just turned 15. And this may not affect the rest of the development community, but for many of my colleagues and me back in home in Seattle, it's an opportunity for us to take stock on what we know now and what we think we can do in the future. In a way, this anniversary has caused us to pause. Much like the MDGs have done for the UN, we've stopped and paused to reflect on who we are, what we've been doing, and where we want to make our investments next. Back in 2000, when we started the foundation, we basically had a few key principles in mind. First, we knew we wanted to exist to fight poverty, the poverty that Bill and I had seen in other places in the world. Our motto was, and is, and will remain, all lives have equal value. Everything we do is about making that motto a reality for billions of people around the world who don't have that same opportunity to thrive. And the second principle that Bill and I have followed is that we believe in innovation. We both come to this from the technology sector with that background in mind. And our theory was that we could take brilliant people and have them apply their brains and resources to health and development, and they could think big, then a lot of change was possible. And the third principle we had, and we knew from the beginning, was we had a lot to learn. Now in 2015, we're still focused on equity. We're still very optimistic about innovation. We are still a learning organization and will continue and need to be a learning organization because there are countless opportunities to learn, to figure out how to bring innovation and health and development together. For example, one of the mistakes we made as a foundation early on is that we focused too much, quite honestly, on technology, on research and development. And we didn't think through enough the delivery mechanisms. We could create the greatest next vaccine with our partners, but if we can't get a woman to accept the polio drops in her child's mouth or a shot in her child's arm, you can have the greatest technology in the world sit on the shelf and not end child mortality. It's also become clear to us that innovation now takes many, many forms. And it's not just scientific forms, it's also behavior change. One of the greatest things we can do for neonate mortality and child mortality is get women to breastfeed. One of the neatest, most innovative things I've seen happen in the last couple of years has come out of Vietnam. They created a social marketing campaign to promote breastfeeding. When the TV turns on, it's a young baby telling adults to breastfeed. And the impact from this very innovative TV campaign is that in just 5 years, breastfeeding rates have tripled in Vietnam. And so I'm eager for the lessons that Vietnam has learned to be shared with the rest of the world. Also, in the last 12 months, I've turned 50. And I think when you reach that milestone age, I'll say at least for me, you start to look at what you want your life to stand for. And there's one lesson that I know that I want my career to stand for the rest of my life. And that is to empower women and girls. Really empower them. Because women are the absolute center of the household. When you invest in a woman, you invest in everybody else in the family. And she invests in them. Their health is lifted up, the health of the family, the community, and ultimately the economy. The data bears this out. Women spend 90% of their earnings on their families, and they spend it on things like medical care and school fees. My experience with women over the years is just as convincing as the data. And in fact, when you talk to the women, they instinctively know what's right. And what I've learned from them on the ground through the privilege of traveling and being in the developing world 4 times a year, I come back and I look to see whether the global statistics match, and they often do. My first trip for the foundation, I was in the foothills of the Himalayas, and I had no idea I was going to learn about women's empowerment. I was there to just learn about the community. The women got me together. The chief elder of the village, a man, was so proud to tell me that they had a new latrine and that they were using it as a small village. And he was so proud of the fact that it was right by his house because it was a status symbol. And then eventually when he wandered away and I got the women aside, there were much giggles and laughter. And when I finally said to them, well, what's going on here? And they said, well, can you see what we did? We got the village chief to build the latrine by his house. His house is downwind of the latrine. You can bet he's going to spend the village resources to keep it clean. That is the power of women. I'll never forget another woman I met in the slums of Nairobi a few years ago. Her name was Mary Ann. We've been talking amongst a group of women about contraceptives and their use of them. And she summed up the whole conversation for women. She said, I want every good thing for this child, and she was holding a beautiful baby girl, before I have my next one. And I thought, that's why we promote contraceptives, so that you can time and space the birth of your children, because you love each one and you want to be able to invest in each one. I took a group of male and female senators to Tanzania a couple of years ago, and they were moved to tears when they heard of a female farmer, Joyce, describe the new maize seed that she had, where she was getting 30% more yield off of her farm. She had a roof on her house, she was feeding her kids, she and her husband were sending them to school, and so when we asked her what she did on what she called her free day on Sundays, she looked at us and she said, "I put my best clothes on and I go preach at the local church." Lastly, I met a woman named Sabita just last month in India, small village in Jharkhand. And she and the other women said to me behind their saris, which they had their faces beaming, they said, "A year ago, nobody in our village knew our names, nobody. We knew the men's names, but not the women. Today, we know each other's names, and everybody for miles around know us. And what these women were doing was not what the self-help group had gone in to teach them, which was more yield off their farms, which they were getting, and more increased income. They were taking rape cases to court and having them tried. They were standing up against the police. They were demanding to the government that they wanted a health care facility in their village. That is what women's empowerment looks like, and that is what we have to unleash around the world. So in short, for me, women and girls, they're not recipients of development programs. They are the engines of economic change, and we need to light them up. We have not, though, as a world, acted accordingly in the last decade. Success doesn't happen automatically. We've learned that we have to work for it. 6 million children fewer dying last year than in 1990. That wasn't just gravity. It was the convergence of finding new ideas, new political will, and bringing those to bear. Europe has been the greatest sense of those three variables. And to make the most of this opportunity in 2015, Europe needs to continue its leadership. So here's what I think it's going to take. 3 things. First, we have to finish the SDG process, and we have to agree to the right targets so we know what we're doing. That means building on the success of the previous MDGs and making sure we finish this unfinished agenda for women and children. Second, we have to make sure that the SDGs are financed, and you heard a lot about that this morning. Earlier this year in Berlin, we made a great start. $7.5 billion was raised for the Vaccine and Immunization Alliance. That's how we're saving so many children around the world. But we're going to need to keep up that same level of commitment at the Financing Summit next month in Addis Ababa. And then we have a very important gathering in September at UNGA. So some may say that we need to move beyond aid. And yes, we need the financing to support the SDGs. It's got to come from a mix of donors, governments, private sector, and philanthropy. But for the foreseeable future, we need to keep investing in overseas development assistance. That is what gets trajectories on the path to growth. It's what allows countries like Latvia and South Korea to graduate from aid and start giving aid to others. And the third thing we need to make sure this year is a success is people, lots of people. We need to get citizens around the world engaged in this process so that they speak up to their leaders and say, I believe in making progress against poverty. I believe in fewer children dying. So we've invested in something called Global Citizen with many of our partners who are in the room, One, CARE, Save the Children, World Vision, to really excite people, get them to share information online, to talk about these goals, and to stand up and say, this is important as a world. The end of extreme poverty, it's within our reach, and it's thrilling to be able to say that. Let's grab this historic opportunity to make a world where everybody has the chance to live a healthy and productive life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melinda Gates, for your inspiring words. And thank you for expressing your views and your vision so eloquently and passionately and rounding up so beautifully our 5 speakers. So that concludes the opening ceremony of European Development Days 2015. I thank again all of our speakers for their clarity, their energy, their passion, and their commitment to the aims and the themes of this forum. I'd also like to say a quick thanks to our interpreters and, of course, our sign language interpreters who join us this morning. This is just the beginning of an exciting 2 days. In your participant pack, you have an agenda. It's got comprehensive information on what's going on and what's being debated and where in the next 48 hours. Now, European Development Days, as you know, is an unparalleled opportunity for the development community to share knowledge and lessons learned and, of course, to showcase achievements. This year's edition promises to be no less stimulating, and that's also thanks to you for coming here and for bringing all of your expertise and your ideas and bringing them all to the table for debate and exchange. I thank you very much for your attention this morning. I thank also very much our audience for joining us online, and I really do wish you a very productive and exciting and inspiring time at this forum.